How can we influence unpleasant behavior of the Chinese tourists? And how can we create a pleasant environment for all stakeholders? I want to spend some time to talk about this from different perspectives. First of all, what are we talking about when we say bad behavior? This is what the China National Tourism Administration themselves have identified as where most complaints are about Chinese tourists that travel abroad. Making a lot of noise in public, cutting in line, cutting queue, showing no respect for local custom and local culture, spitting, urinating and defecating, littering, speaking impolitely, taking photos when it's not allowed, smoking in public places, and not remaining rational when they are unsatisfied. These are very true, and you see a lot of news in the media about this, but it's also not true for every Chinese tourist. I think it's true for a couple of extremes. There's a couple of extremes. There's two extremes I want to talk about. One extreme is the Tuhao. The Tuhao is basically somebody that is very uncivilized, very uneducated, but has gotten rich very quickly. And there's a lot of Tuhao in China because of the economic boom in the past 30 years. So they sometimes say, especially for people from rural areas, that China has gotten rich before it got civilized. So a lot of people don't know how to behave, but these are also the people with money that travel abroad a lot. A different category, and it's this one, is the so-called Little Emperors, and especially what they call the Er Dai. The Er Dai is the second generation rich, so the children of the very rich people in China. And especially those young people have a real sense of entitlement. Now, why do you think that is? Any idea? Why do you think that the behavior of what they call little emperors, kids that are very spoiled and have a sense of entitlement, that they should get what they want? And again, these are two extremes. We're not talking about the average Chinese person here. These are extreme profiles. But any idea how that happened?
They feel superior.
Self-righteousness, God bless them.
Yeah?
They're single, precious child in
Yeah,
a rich family.
that's it. It's this. The one-child policy has resulted in a lot of attention from two parents, but also four grandparents, on one child in this situation. At the same time, children are important here as well, but there's much more focus, much more attention, much more pressure on these children. So they want the best for their child or their grandchild. And in some cases, again, not in all of the cases, this results in very spoiled brats that they call little emperors. Again, one of the profiles. And I think that these two things, like the Tuhao and the little emperors, are some of the Chinese tourists that are causing some problems.
But I have a question. It sounds like a funny question, but it's not meant to be. If you look at the defecation in public, I mean, if you're a farmer...
I don't look at the defecation in public. I try not to.
If you're a farmer and you don't have a toilet, I can imagine that, you do that wherever, and then you do that wherever. But if you have the money to travel, that means that you are not a farmer anymore.
Yeah.
So how do you put the two together?
Well, if you look at the cases of defecating in public, most of the time it's people from rural areas, and I'm going to show something later on that will explain it. But also, a lot of the cases involve little children that really need to go.
Okay.
And sometimes people don't know where to go. The child needs to go, so they want to relieve the child. What I want to talk a bit more about why. Why does this happen? Why do some Chinese tourists behave this way? Very important, and especially if you spend some time in China, there is a lack of experience of different cultures. There are a lot of minorities. There are 55 minorities in China, but most of them live like in certain places in the country. If you go in the middle of the country, people are not even used to different cultures within their own country, let alone a different country. They simply don't know any other way than the way that they're used to. Then, for a large group of people, especially if they travel in groups, it's the first time that they're on a plane. It's the first time that they're outside their own country, in a luxurious hotel maybe. So they simply don't know what is expected of them a lot of the times. There's been a lot of stories about Chinese people on planes that have opened up the emergency exit. And every time, it's not intentionally. They just thought I wanted some fresh air, so I thought I'd open up a window. It's just simply lack of knowledge about the situation. A few decades ago, when Americans started to travel, they used to be called the ugly Americans because they were very misbehaving. Yeah. It's basically the same thing. It also took time for them to get used to different cultures and different expectations.
And I think if you ask the French or the Spanish people how they perceive the Dutch, if they work on camping sites or whatever, they will not have a great image of us either.
Yeah. A very important one as well about, for instance, cutting in line and being very loud in public has to do with the fact that every aspect of life in China is extremely competitive. Whether you're in school, whether you've just graduated from university and have to find a job, there's so many Chinese people competing for the same resources, for the same things. If my wife has quite often said to me, yeah, I had some of this behavior as well in China, because if I wouldn't, I would miss out. You wouldn't survive. You sort of have to sort of move your way in sometimes. So, and if you're used to that behavior at home, then it's very difficult not to have the same behavior when you go outside. Spitting. Spitting is especially still common with the elder generations and with people from rural areas as well. Most Chinese, if you ask them, don't even know why they are spitting. If you go a long time back, it has to do with traditional Chinese medicine that back in the days told people that you need to remove any form of slime from your body. Now, if you do that, if you act this way, and you just start spitting and clearing your throat a lot of times, you actually start to irritate your glands as well. So it's sort of like a vicious circle that you end up in. But most of these people don't even know why they are doing it, and they are not aware of it. When my father-in-law, when he visits us, then my wife has to remind him all of the time, don't spit here in the Netherlands. And he's not doing that consciously. It's just, I mean, why do we in the Netherlands give 3 kisses? I don't know. Why? Yeah. Some of the things that are really common to us are difficult to explain, and who sort of determines what's good and bad? It's just different. I mean, who here has made a really bad cultural screw-up ever when going abroad? I have. And I was not aware of it. I was not aware that sitting in front of a Buddha statue in the same posture with your back to the Buddha, having your photo taken, is really not respectful. I didn't know that at the time. Later on, I've studied a lot of Buddhism when I went to different countries. And I realized how bad my behavior was. Fortunately, nobody saw me there. When I visited the Gold Temple in Amritsar in India, Holy Sikh Temple, I had read a lot about behavior in India. And I knew that your feet are considered to be like the dirtiest, the most unholy part of your body. But at one point, I sat down here at the edge, and I was sort of resting my feet, pointing towards like the holiest of places. And there were actually people coming up to me saying, that's not allowed, you shouldn't point your feet. And I had read about that. But I didn't realize, because it was such natural behavior. So cultural awareness goes 2 ways. So you also should spend some time trying to understand the Chinese people. And this is one I can really advise you to read, The Xenophobe's Guide to the Chinese. And when you read this, especially for the Dutch ones, also read The Xenophobe's Guide to the Dutch, because it explains a lot of our really strange behavior. And if you compare those things, and if you're willing to understand somebody else's background, the reasons why somebody behaves like that, it will help you a lot. And especially, I think, it's really true for you guys, because you're studying hospitality. So, you're the hosts. You're the hosts. They are the guests. So what can we do to solve this problem? What can we do to minimize the bad behavior or the aggravation to other people. Because the biggest problem normally is that Chinese tourists turn off other tourists. That's most of the time the biggest problem. And of course I can ask all of you to spend some time in getting to know the Chinese culture, but you cannot ask other tourists to do the same. They're basically also traveling, they're there for a good time. So what's a couple of things that we can do? First of all, provide information in a compelling way. And especially if you do that together with agencies and tour guides, the incoming tour guides, Chinese spend a lot of time on the bus. So maybe we could make a DVD explaining the culture and also explaining these are things that you should not really do in a Western country, and this is fine. But these guys are the most important influencers for Chinese tour groups. Still, not all of the people in their group will follow their advice, but they are the most influential persons to the Chinese tourists. Positive segregation. Any idea what I mean with positive segregation?
Separating them from the other tourists?
Yeah, in a positive way. There is a mountain resort in Switzerland that has started special trains up the mountain for Chinese people, because when they would put Chinese people and other tourists together, they would have big problems. But if they would be on their own train, that would not be a problem. Nobody complained about that until it was mentioned in some newspaper that Chinese people had to go on a different train. Then it wasn't positive segregation anymore. A very good example is a business partner of mine from Belgium. He works a lot with Chinese tourist groups and hotels. And in one of the hotels that the Chinese tour groups were staying, they had a lot of complaints about the noise that Chinese people were making during breakfast. So what they did is they gave the Chinese tourists a separate room where they could have breakfast in. Now, to the Chinese people, this actually was like...
VIP.
Yeah, there's a VIP treatment. Because in China, if you are in a separate room in a restaurant, you're a VIP. So they thought that this was like... They liked it, the other tourists liked it, the hotel didn't have a problem anymore. Same hotel, by the way, is next to a graveyard. The Chinese people that sort of opened their curtains and saw that graveyard, they immediately wanted to leave. So now they put all of the Chinese tourists at the other side of the hotel. So it's just taken into account different things. Maybe you can use some Chinese language signs as well. And, as you'll see in a minute, if that doesn't work, Chinese people are really easily influenced by the threatening of enforcement. Maybe if you put under there, if you spit here, it costs you €100. Then it might work better than when you don't have that. So this all sounds very forceful, but it is true at the same time. So a sign like this might seem very funny. Why would somebody do something like that? Or why would you, in a Chinese restaurant in Amsterdam, have a sign like this? You should put the used toilet paper inside the toilet. Because people are not used to that in China. This is a relatively clean Chinese public toilet. It's a hole in the ground. People are used to squat. That's why some people, when they come to the West, think that this is the way you need to use a Western toilet. Especially people in rural areas, they might never have experienced using a Western-style toilet. So, also, the sewage systems in some areas in China are so bad that you're not allowed to put toilet paper into the toilet. It normally goes into a separate basket, because otherwise the sewage pipes would clog up. So again, if you understand why people are doing this, it's not like they are so dirty. They are actually trying to do a good thing. They're actually trying to behave. But by lack of knowledge, they have the wrong behavior in our eyes. So this is a sign I saw in a hotel in Sri Lanka. So in case people don't speak English, "Qing anjing," quiet please. This is how easy it can be. This is a sign I saw in Kinderdijk, where there was one of the windmills, or one of the houses was actually private property. It was not part of the museum. In Kinderdijk you have a lot of windmills. And they also put it in Chinese on there. Unfortunately, this was the only Chinese that I saw in the whole of Kinderdijk, so that was not a good thing, but they are trying. But again, this sign says, dangerous, no climbing. This is in the Summer Palace in Beijing. So even signs might not always work. So important about this part is try to see things from another person's perspective. Next question. Is the Chinese government responding to Chinese behavior abroad? Yes, they are. And they don't like it. They are very ashamed about some of the news about Chinese tourists, even though, like I said, these are exceptions to the rule some of the times. And they've actually made a booklet with instructions that they distribute among Chinese tourists that go abroad. They've also set up a blacklist. If you do any of these things, you go on the blacklist and you might not be able to travel for the next 5 years. So again, see, enforcement, threatening people with punishments does sometimes help, because the number of these cases is going down in the last couple of years. Again, the government is also taking part into trying to educate people, and not just by saying you're not allowed to do this, but this is the way you're supposed to act. So it's both in a positive and a threatening way.